Hey everybody, Esso here. Said last week that this video was going to be up on Monday, but I've been working really hard on that essay that I was talking about, so. We're doing another episode this week criticizing trends I see a lot in libertarian arguments, or how libertarians tend to characterize principles of their philosophy. I promise that we won't be doing another one of these for a while, especially because there's a Marxist channel recently which caught my attention, and it's been a while since I've made a video on Marxism. Plus, literally all I've been talking about recently is just criticizing other libertarians, and I want to talk about something else. So, I haven't figured out what the subject of next week's episode will be, but expect it to be something tangentially related at least to Marxist philosophy, as well as for a response video to that to be made soon. Anyway, very oftentimes when statists or politicians hailing from a self-proclaimed conservative political allegiance attempt to vaguely pay lip service to property rights and markets to festoon their aggressive monopolist state interests, it's not uncommon to hear the concept of meritocracy introduced as a characterization of both the state society using liberal philosophy as a public basis for its socio-political order, or an explanation for any sort of market exchange from a standpoint of economic study in general. Presumably because it's just the closest thing which they possibly can make to an ethical justification for property before they begin contradicting their own narrative about the state's role in society, and the meritocracy argument goes as follows. In a free market, in other words, a state society with a liberal socio-political order, people who succeed are the most productive and the ones who actually work hard. Without this, there would be no incentive to work, and poors would end up taking resources they didn't earn, whatever that means. Now, right off the bat, this is not actually an argument making the case positively for property ethics or natural rights. This is a consequentialist appeal disguising itself by appealing to morally loaded concepts such as who earned what resource. You can identify it as such because it conflates economic theory with ethical philosophy. Also, its internal reasoning insinuates that its legitimacy is based on the conclusion the argument presuppositionally identifies as being correct, as opposed to using ethical truths or axioms to establish a praxis which can be used to show the conclusion to be true. The problem here is that since the conclusion of this framework isn't informed by any sort of necessary explanation for how it naturally has to be arrived at, it's entirely arbitrary. I could replace a few of the phrases or word choices and make this exact same argument in favor of a Marxist state socio-political order. As it pertains to observing markets, there are also quite a few problems introduced by characterizing the study of social relations between human actors as a meritocracy. The cookie crowd, i.e., the people that I would characterize as being my more observant viewers, have probably already noticed this and have been screaming at me to point it out, asking when am I going to point it out. But we do not live in a society where people can freely associate and where people wouldn't have to worry about having the products of their agency taken from them or otherwise having their rights infringed upon for trying to do so. And assuming we do implies that people who are successful got there from hard work and helping others, even though the people who become wealthy through being capitalists in the state's legal market obtain their wealth and status in society almost entirely due to legal privilege and regulatory capture imposed onto society through direct or indirect state manipulation, while the people who are relegated to white market wage slavery and poverty are largely stuck there due to state-imposed barriers of entry or legal restrictions. So, assuming that a liberal state society is a meritocracy, it's not even internally consistent. But a big problem, and the main reason why I made this video, is that meritocracy has become a bit of an anti-principle, which plagues the discussion of the philosophy of libertarianism by obscuring debate on principles and deliberately misleading people on how to conceive of their principles so that they make vulgar arguments that actually end up implicitly favoring the state. Attempting to characterize a libertarian end with the concept of meritocracy is cursed in a couple of different ways. It of course assumes that and attempts to defend conditions in a state society which were created through state manipulation or incentives which wouldn't otherwise exist had the state not intervened in our social relations. It assumes that the natural conclusions of free association exist in a sort of Darwinian state of nature, not taking into consideration ways people can or have created organizations, such as fraternal societies, which function effectively as mutual aid, charity, or even gift-based systems of exchange, which prospered and throughout their existence have been antagonized by the state. I'll be linking a good lecture by Sheldon Richman on the subject in the pinned comment. Basically, it mischaracterizes how exactly self-interest influences our actions. But let's suppose for a moment that we were talking about an anarchy, and there was absolutely no artificial barrier to entry being imposed by the state, and no proprietary manipulation of finance and credit by state-established cartels or front groups. So we could safely say that we are talking about a fairly accurate conception of a society where the issues Austrians point to with systemic coercion and the subsequent distortion of market signals and incentives no longer exist. Would it at least be less of a problem? Well, no, actually I'd argue that this would create more issues, aside from making it more difficult to argue for your conclusions. Meritocracy implicitly assumes that resources exist within a zero-sum model, and that by profiting, you're defeating other market actors who weren't as smart or knowledgeable for their investment, which creates problems because this would lead one to have to argue that profit can be generated based on an arbitrary util of skill, when in reality, unless you're going to seriously attempt to argue that perfect information exists, or that the investment of capital is somehow inherently productive in the same way as actually producing specialized commodities, or that time preference doesn't exist, capital cannot reasonably be assumed to guarantee a profit, especially if we were to refer to a freed market. Variables which are completely out of an entrepreneur or capitalist control play a heavy role in whether or not they succeed, regardless of whether or not the state is intervening. Although the differences wouldn't be anywhere near as prominent, there are still the aforementioned issues with assuming that anyone who is successful became successful from skill and skill alone, because that implies anyone not in that position is there because of a lack of skill or effort, on top of the issues with meritocracy from an ethical standpoint or a standpoint of trying to argue libertarian principles in general. Anyway, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. If anyone has any questions about some of the economic concepts which I brought up in this video that I might not have gone into a lot of detail with, or enough that you could understand, just leave a comment. I'll go ahead and respond to as many people as I can. Even if I don't respond, there's a good chance I'll probably make a video later explaining some of this stuff. Anyway,